never go for perfection, because the amount of effort and energy that it takes to go for perfection on anything could be 10 times the amount of effort and you don't get the same return. But you can always do that little bit extra, which makes things, that just makes things special or adds that extra value. And sometimes that if you consistently do that 10% over your lifetime in your business of activities, you'll see that there it is the difference between the level of success businesses have.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Tom Shipley with us. Tom is a serial entrepreneur, investor, and advisor with a background in the IDF Special Forces Unit 669. With expertise in brands and business roll-ups, his startups have generated over $2 billion in sales through direct-to-consumer marketing and retail. Tom has also raised $100 million from private equity to launch the Amazon aggregator Foundry Brands. With his latest agency aggregator and CEO M&A summit, he aims to normalize a people-first acquisition model. Tom, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's great to see you and great to be talking again.
So I would love to have you share a bit about your storied background, how you ended up doing M&A, roll-ups, all that sort of stuff, and kind of your humble beginnings, the superhero in training and all that. So can we start there?
Absolutely. I guess like a lot of entrepreneurs, we come from, there's always adversities in everyone's lives. And I guess I'm no different from that perspective because I'm a kid from Cleveland, Ohio with dyslexia that I didn't know I had most of my life. And, the challenging part is being raised in a household where my dad was having challenges and he made it, his outlet was that I was less than. So but again, we all have adversity, and the question is how do we channel that? And that for me, that was just a fire that kept on igniting, growing inside of me for wanting to have impact in life. And I'm going to say that. I was at Florida State University. Life was great. Suddenly, I showed up up at my parents' house, and they said, "What are you doing here, Tom?" And I said, "Well, I want you to know, is at the end of the semester, my life is meant for a greater impact, and I'm going to be leaving university at the end of the semester, my sophomore year, and going to move to Israel and join the Israeli Defense Forces for this very young nation." And of course, my parents did not take that very kindly. And Stephan, we always look at our defining moments. And for me, standing up to my dad, which was this pillar and this tower in front of me, and as after he made a strong statement of what I should be doing and saying no was one of those defining moments. And then he said to me, he said, "Tom, remember, your mediocre athletic ability. You don't know the language. You don't know the country. And what are you going to do? What are they going to do with you when you get there? They might not let you in. And if they do, you can be pushing papers." But me with that fire inside my belly, it was, you tell that to a 20-year-old kid, you doubt them. And for me, it was just, I'll show you. And that's exactly what happened. And I started my journey, and it was that classic journey of, you identify the goal, and along the way, you become that person. So I clearly wasn't a person capable of being successful in Special Forces in the Israeli Army. But along the way of creating that vision and not accepting what the numbers said, I became that person and learned some of the most valuable lessons in life from those 3 years in the Special Forces.
What were some of those lessons?
I'll start with this, and I'm going to say it's especially pertains from an entrepreneurial perspective. And I'll start with one, which is a buddy of mine told me, "Tom, you can always take another step. Remember, when you look around you and everyone looks like they can go forever, they're looking at you and saying the same thing. And no matter what, you can always take another step." And I'm going to say that in business, we always have adversities. And even when you think you're done and everyone around you and your advisor is saying you're done, might as well hang it up. The question is do you have the grit and the tenacity to take that extra step and the next extra step and the next? And eventually most things work out because there's some bit of momentum that's on the side. So it's that grit and the tenacity. It's another one is, as a medic, you're taught that where you're in a mass casualty environment, you'll never have the resources and you have to improvise. And they say in Hebrew, a good medic is one who improvises. And I say just a good entrepreneur is one who improvises also. And we never have the resources we need. It's all about resourcefulness. Yeah. And the other big thing that I learned was the team. We had a very small team, and just from the numbers perspective, there were 10,000 soldiers that reached out and tried to get out into my unit. We went through a battery test, and they picked 1,000 of us for Hell Week. Out of that Hell Week, there were 25 of us that were picked for an 18-month course, and of which there were 13 of us that finished it. And it wasn't the most obvious ones that I first met that first day that actually met, but as I got to know these incredible human beings, I'm going to say that it's very clear of the quality of the character and the tenacity and the grit that they had. And I've seen what they've done in life has been incredible after that. But I also learned that I was able to go to a higher level that I only achieved because of the people around me. So as we're building our teams, as we're building our companies, we can only go as high as the people we put around us. So um, to me, it's all about team. It's about integrity. It's about quality, and it's about people that just don't accept status quo and that are always pushing each other.
Mm, I love that. And when you're talking about Hell Week and about team building, teamwork, it reminds me of a book I've read multiple times to my 5-year-old, The Way of the Warrior Kid by Jocko Willink, the former Navy SEAL, and how discipline is just so integral to a successful life. And it starts really young. And so I'm curious how Hell Week and everything that you went through built your discipline and how that shows up for you today.
It was just the routines that you pick up and that you always follow through because the details really do matter. And so, in the Army, they start with things about how often you clean your gun, and you always look for what they used to say is the elephant in the barrel, which is really a little bit, but it's about the focus on the detail, but always keeping your eye on the big picture and putting that discipline in your life. And for me, is that there's always been structure, there's always been discipline, but there's also been a point of what I consider is what hard and difficult is. It changed my definition for hard difficult. In the Army, we had um, they call it hamshishi, which is Thursday, Friday, which means that there's no separation. And typically Thursday to Friday night during our training, we didn't go to sleep. So when I started my first business, I said, well, in the Army, I didn't sleep for Thursday, Friday night. So why should I sleep on my business on Thursday, Friday? So I used to pull all nighters of my first business. Now, I also realize that the level of expectations I have on myself, it would be unfair to put on other people. So I always try to keep somewhat of a balance for my team and not push my level of high expectations on them. Something really important that I learned along the way, though, is there are environments that I feel that most people succeed in, at least the people I want to be attracted to and be around. And there are those environments that are very challenging. And I'm going to say that there are environments, I'm going to bring Amazon, for example. In my opinion, Amazon working there is they have high expectation and high pressure. Most people cannot survive, and they are an excellent, incredible organization. I work best in an environment with high expectation and low pressure. I don't want to ride people. I don't want to micromanage them. I like to set high expectation and see the best in people and help them rise that level. And if they don't have the inner strength, and again, I go back to that core team of what I learned of tier one operators, if they don't have that passion and that commitment for what greatness is, and they don't have that discipline to actually achieve it and that sense of curiosity and hunger, then they're not going to work best in my environments. I like people that thrive in a high expectation, low pressure environment. And again, that's another thing of a big takeaway there. And then people that really follow through have strong discipline, period.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
was it that you learned from the book that was your big takeaway, your child's takeaway?
Hmm. Well, one thing that just jumps out at me is the warrior code. So when you develop discipline, when you develop these habits of excellence and how you show up in the world, you have these mantras that kind of go play in your head, and they help you to show up more powerfully and be the best version of yourself. And so he went through all these different warrior codes, from samurais to the Vikings to the U.S. Army, et cetera. And yeah, he just showed and explained the process of developing your own warrior code. And the protagonist in the story developed his. He was a little, kid who was getting bullied, and he had to turn into a warrior so he would no longer get bullied, and he would be strong and be able to do pull-ups and so forth. And yeah, that just really struck me. So I'm curious, do you have a warrior code or some sort of mission, vision, values that for you was heavily inspired by your background in the special forces and doing all that, warrior training back then?
It's funny. I mean, there's the fact is that I just don't ever quit is ingrained, but certain parts of me were there was this match between who I was and even inside who my values were. And when I went in, there was this match for that, such as I just don't ever quit. I still don't ever quit. Um, I also don't. I have the energy that I never really get exhausted and tired. And I also learned that there are two different types of people in the world. For me, those people that give me energy and those that don't.
Mm.
And I learned that in the Army, and I find that there used to be a long criteria list that I used to have as far as what people I want in my life, and I made it really simple 7 years ago. I said, let me put it this way: intuitively, I feel, I just know whether someone gives me energy or not, and it has drive, passion, commitment, view of the world, the way the depth people have, curiosity, and integrity is a big piece of it. I can't. People without integrity drain me. There was an interesting exercise that they did during that Hell Week, where we hadn't slept for a few days, and finally they let us lay down, and quickly within an hour, they firecrackers went off, gunshots went off, they pulled us out, and they had us, and we are just barely can stand at this point. We just can't, and they had us stand in two long lines, and they said, okay, we want you to go out into the desert. You'll see between the bushes, you'll see a nightstick, a phosphorus nightstick. When you get there, it's about 100 meters away. We want you to race there, do 100 push-ups, and come back as fast as you can. We're timing each person. And of course, you're just sitting there waiting your turn, falling asleep, standing up, and then it's your turn. And suddenly, I went, and I remember that I went down and I did my 100, and I went, was that 99 or 100? And then I went down to that extra one, that extra two, because I just didn't know. Then I came back, and they clocked me. The next morning, they called out 14 people's names, and they said, you're out. And it turns out is those people weren't out because they were slow. They were out because they went out in the field where they didn't think anyone was watching them, and they never did their push-ups.
Mm.
And the question is, if you can't trust people when they're alone to do their jobs, why would you risk your life? Why would you risk your life with them? And I'm going to say that morality code of integrity has always been part of who I am and what's important for me and the people that I want to surround myself with. I don't want to surround myself with people where there are question marks.
Yeah.
And whether I do deals, it doesn't matter how great a deal is or whatever I want to do. It's about the quality of their character is really the key thing that drives me.
And what's funny is you're always watched. You're never alone. There's no such thing as a private thought. I mean, if you get like really kind of metaphysical about it, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you're embarrassed about the things that you're thinking about, well, that's a problem, because a lot of people, a lot of souls are listening in, and of course God as well. So yeah, something to consider.
There's an interesting rule I picked up at that period of time, but this is not something that was taught to me. It was something just I picked up, which is my 10% rule.
Mm.
My 10% rule is you can always give it an extra 10%. Everything in life, and that 10% makes the difference a lot of times between good to great. And I'm going to say most of the time, as far as what can be done is special. Whether I'm doing something for my wife, my daughters, in business, the 10%. Now, I say never go for perfection, because the amount of effort and energy that it takes to go for perfection on anything could be 10 times the amount of effort, and you don't get the same return. But you can always do that little bit extra, which makes things that just makes things special or adds that extra value. And sometimes that if you consistently do that 10% over your lifetime in your business of activities, you'll see that there it is the difference between the level of success businesses have, as well as including how you delight your customers. It really doesn't matter how well your product is designed with your execution. So I find that that is the biggest ROI. And if you train your team to consistently follow the 10% rule, there's a great return there.
And you gave a great example just a few minutes ago. You're doing extra push-ups just to make sure.
That's exactly it. It cost me nothing.
Yeah.
In the end, it saved me everything. So that period of time was amazing. And then so with that fire in my belly, grit and tenacity, come back to States. I came back to States to get my education, to finish my educational path. I thought it would be easier doing that in the United States and than following here in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, coming out of Startup Nation, I did my first startup at that period of time. Again, and my idea about
Did you go back to Florida State or did you go somewhere else?
no, I went to University of Central Florida, and you know, your idea of risk and risk tolerance is so totally different. I had $100 in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I had a business idea, and I took some risk. I rolled the dice with $100, not knowing I had anything else. I was lucky enough I was able to sleep on the floor of my parents' apartment, since there was no other bedrooms or places for me to sleep there, but that was good. It was better than sleeping on a rock bed on a riverbed. So, so I had nothing to lose, and I started my first business as product I saw in Israel. It's non-consequential now, but I saw it in Israel. It was successful. You know, I said I can do it in the United States. Two Israelis had done it in California, so I started manufacturing car shades, the corrugated pieces of cardboard. And for me, it was just an incredible season. It exploded throughout, you know, the East Coast, and finally I saw myself not only selling in flea markets to make some cash while I was selling to Albertsons grocery stores, and I was waiting for their 120-day terms for them to pay me. I called up one day, and again, it's what you have as far as risk. And before that, I was maybe a shy kid, but here I was calling up Ford Motor Company, talking to the head of marketing, saying, "Listen, I'm imagine a million billboards and a million cars. I'm coming up to talk to Chrysler next week. I'm free at this time. Can we meet?" Then I called GM and did the same thing, and suddenly I was able to get meetings with one of the heads of marketing in each one of these organizations. Here was I was a kid with this idea and this vision, but it was probably one of the best educations in my life. And I can say financially, it was fine while it ran its course, but from a business perspective, I learned more out of that than I did in throughout my degrees.
That's cool. Do you know the story about Steve Jobs as a 12-year-old?
No, I don't.
Oh, this is, I think you'll find this relevant. So he wanted to build some sort of, I don't know, some sort of device, electronic device. I forget what it was, some sort of um, filter wave thing or something. I don't know. Anyways, by the way, I'll include the video from Steve talking about this in the show notes for this episode. So what happened was he cold called one of the founders of Hewlett Packard. I forget if it was Hewlett or if it was Packard. He just found the guy in the phone book, and he lived in Palo Alto, and so we called him, and the guy answered the phone, and he said, "I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm trying to build this thing, and I'm wondering if I can just get any spare parts for it that you don't want to keep." And the guy was impressed by the the tenacity of this kid, and he said, "Sure, come on over." And then he ended up giving Steve a job on the factory line building these devices over the summer. And all the stuff that happened that just really catapulted Steve into a whole new level started with him doing the thing that nobody else would dream of doing, of just cold calling out of the blue one of the founders of Hewlett Packard. I just think that was such an inspiring story.
It's a great story, and you're so right. And the people are so shy, and they won't even pick up the phone these days, right? They won't call someone because they're fearful of doing that, and they want to follow
Yeah.
norms. Okay. And to me is, what do you have to risk? Because the greatest fear that I have in my life is the one I'll have when I'm 90 years old, and that of regret. And so I will do. I don't know. The two things I've always fought is that, and a life of of niceness and mediocrity.
Mm.
To me, those are just big fears that actually drive me. Is what can I do to think of doing, and therefore is taking the. And by the way, I'm have that part of me that battles that. There are some people that it doesn't even discomfort doesn't even register in their psyche, and they're the first person out there. That's not the way I'm wired. So while internally I have voices screaming at me, don't do it. The question is why not? What do you have to lose? And to push past that discomfort. And you talked about um, habits and discipline. And I'm going to say atomic habits, especially when you do things enough time, it becomes habit.
Yeah.
I used to be afraid of heights. And I remember once I was hiking through, it was in somewhere in the Judean desert. It was a group of other 19-year-old kids, and we were just walking down this riverbed. And then people were hopping over rocks and tripping. And I went, hey, there's a little goat trail there. Let's take that. So I started going down a goat trail, and 5 people were following me. And then I kept on going, and suddenly I realized that I'm about 15 feet up, and I'm at the edge of a where it ends.
Mm.
But just about 6 inches away, there was I just had to just hop, and I can get to the next path. And I counted to three, then I counted to 10, then I counted to 20, and I froze because I was afraid of heights.
Mm.
And then I hesitated as I made the jump, and then I fell. I'm lucky that when I fell onto the riverbed, I ended up luckily on my thigh, smashing my canteen. It broke my fall because I could easily have killed myself. But it's the risk of hesitation. So the hesitate in my mind is, no matter what the discomfort is, at the count of three, I go. And that lesson of the count of three, I go, is first time I was jumping out of a plane. I'm afraid of heights. Count of three, you go. You just don't think twice about it. So I need to make that phone call. I need to call, whether it's I'm doing a capital raise, whether I'm calling a private equity firm and I'm hesitating, or whatever I'm doing is at the count of three, pick up the phone and go. Boom. And that's part of my atomic habits that's ingrained in me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Mel Robbins is famous for the 3-second rule, where you count down from 3 to 1, or maybe it's 10 to 1, and you do the thing, within that time period, or less. It's like you're blasting off, and if you need to get out of bed but you don't feel like it, or whatever it is, you do it in that time period. And yeah, that stuck with me.
And if you try to have rules that you don't break, like the 3-second rule, then it's just then it's a very powerful tool for you can do it that you can do. So just real quickly, after that, I finished my degrees. I wanted to buy a company, but I didn't know how and couldn't find the right. But also valuations in the direct response world, which I was doing some consulting work with, were getting out of control because of the dot-com boom. And so I decided to launch my own company. I found a niche and I launched the T. Shipley catalog. Half our business was online. We're mailing out millions of catalog each month. Now, remember, I started by raising $10,000 in this business. And so it was just, it was, and starting with nothing, but it's the thing of is create that big vision. And it's the lesson I learned over time is the bigger the vision that you create, the easier it is to recruit your team, recruit people, and if you need capital along the way. So it was a big vision I created for this business, clear niche with significant discretionary income. And so suddenly I was off. It launched. I ran out of money along the way. I got lucky, fortunate that one of my contacts, I guess fortunate, but I say you make your own luck. One of my contacts along the way, an investment banker from New York, brought me an incredible deal. Boise Cascade was spinning off a direct response division. I was able to acquire it, pay off the money that I kind of borrowed within 30 days from the deal structure that we put together on it was so positive for us, because we'll talk about this maybe in a little bit, is the difference between a seller's attitude and a buyer's attitude. Here I was able to buy a $15 million business, profitable business that had been around for years. And I was able to buy it for pretty much as working capital, which I got back right away. from that business. Now, why would any business do that? Well, they were a multi-billion-dollar company selling off a division, and this was a small division, the big division that they said it didn't make sense. We're either going to have to close it down or find a home for it. And if they could find a home, and they found a home, it was a rounding error. They really didn't care about it, but they just didn't want to shut it down because it had such a legacy. Those are different for me as a buyer. It was everything. So the buyer and the seller's attitudes are typically never the same, and therefore understanding the seller is really important. So for me, that solved my cash crunch. It significantly increased our size of it a business and put us on trajectory. I merged my business exit a year later. But the key thing is that what I learned is that what I developed over that period of time was a blueprint from taking on a very obscure my name and creating a iconic brand from it, and how you can use direct response and omni direct response marketing to develop iconic brands. Now we know that as just true in facts, in fact, because we see that all the time. But back then it wasn't a fact. So I said, let me apply this to an industry that it hadn't been done before, and where we were told we would absolutely fail. You will never, ever, ever be able to build an iconic beauty brand using direct response marketing, because direct response marketing was not looked at something that was prestige. And I said, I'll show you what impressions, unit economics can do, and great storytelling and conversion can do. And that's what we did. We went financially all in. A year later, we ended up with several different channels, great lifetime value, great customer acquisition cost. The only problem is we ran out of money, and I didn't have enough money to pay our bills, like my mortgage. My wife was very annoyed at that I couldn't pay the mortgage, and we were worried about how we're going to pay the food. So myself and my partner, how do we solve that? Go back to playbook number one is we bought a $15 million business generating $1.5 million EBITDA. It was a growing, successful business, and because it was growing successful, we're able to borrow money in order to create a great liquidity event for the two young owners that own it. And then you put my $331,000 brand on top of this platform, which had technology, funnel stack, developer, designer, fulfillment, customer service, everything we needed. And within 3 years, we did $100 million. On that first little $331,000 brand we created, we did our first $1 billion of revenue on that brand. But the key was the acquisition. What would happen if we didn't do that acquisition? I don't know. We would have found some way, but it would have been a lot longer. And so that's the legacy as far as learning lessons over time is, um, what did it solve? The acquisitions can solve most every business challenge. Let me say it again. Acquisitions can solve almost every business challenge. And remember, we had no money, we had no resources left at that period of time. Didn't have a tech stack. We needed tech. We needed new channels. We needed to be really proficient in the online channel, and we were proficient in radio and print at that time. Online, we weren't. So suddenly we bought the capabilities, we bought the expertise, we bought the technology and the platform and cash flow, and that be able to allow us to grow. And we had nothing. So people that think that you need deep resources and balance sheets and have a lot of experience doing acquisitions, that proved, and again, we were very young in our career back then, that proved that that's not true. And I've been able to do that again and again and again from an acquisition perspective. So, and that's the story of Atlantic Coast Brands. It was brand after beauty brand after beauty brand, including finding a really interesting Purple Ocean opportunity, which was our most successful brand.
And which one was that?
Karenique. And it's still the leader in women's hair regrowth. And the reason why I say Purple Ocean, again, no one talks about Purple Ocean strategy. They talk about blue and red ocean, right? And what I always like is that you have your red ocean where you have so much competition, commodities are there, uh, battles are being fought for pennies and shelf space and exposure. The blue ocean are where I say is that people don't even know what the products are, and you have to do such deep education. And then you get this in between area where the demand is there in that red ocean, and you're creating a new vehicle, or you're segmenting your solution for a segment of the population and going deep in it. And therefore you can pull everyone from this very crowded red bloody ocean and pull them into your purple ocean, which is what we did with Karenique for women's hair regrowth. Everyone was doing either straight Rogaine, straight men's, and they maybe had a SKU, an item for women, or there were those that did unisex. one out of every three women suffer from hair loss, and yet no one had developed a brand exclusively for women, and that's how we were able to win. Is it was strong demand, and we created a new vehicle. Now it had to be a great product. Start with that, with a PhD on staff. It was an FDA approved product, so we were able to substantiate the claims. But it created the rare opportunity where we're able to dominate the market, and had so many major CPG companies try to beat us, direct response companies try to beat us, take us, and so especially retail, which is brutal to stay on the shelves, and every one of them got delisted over time except for us.
Wow.
So again, that's just the power of omni-channel marketing and the story of that. And altogether, between all our brands, we did about $2 billion of revenue over that 15-year period of time.
Congratulations.
Like I said, it was a great ride, but yeah, along the way is every time we thought, and this is the other lesson I learned, is when you are at the top of the mountain and you feel that wind behind your back and nothing can stop you, be careful, because it's never as good as you think it is. A brick wall will concrete wall most likely fall on your head, or you're going to hit it. And the converse is also true, which is when you're at the end of the rope and everyone says you're done, and you really believe you're done, you're probably not done. There's always gas in the tank. There's always something you can do. It's never as bad as you think it is, because 2 years from now, you're going to look back and say, wow, I don't know why I was so worried and scared at that period of time.
Yeah.
I had more options that I was aware of.
Yeah. That reminds me of the quote, this too shall pass. Whether it's good or bad, this too shall pass.
100%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had those situations with Atlanticus brand, Stephan, is we had challenging times, challenging years followed by great years. We were able to get 2018. We got 3 term sheets between $55 and $75 million for the business. For the brand, it would have been a very nice day for us. And then our manufacturer, basically the sole manufacturer of our continuity product with FDA approval on their product. They're the only one in the world that had the NDA for that. They went bankrupt. Chapter 7 locks on the door. Suddenly you can't ship your. We called our FDA attorney and said, how long will it take us to get a rush NDA so we can start manufacturing this? She said, I think I can push it through in 16 months. What happens if you don't ship your monthly auto ships for 90 days? You lose most everyone on it. And so that's how you go from a $600,000 a month profit to $600,000 a month loss. And so, and the bank then called us up and said, guys, we're just going to liquidate and sell what we can and get whatever cash we are done, because we're done. And I'm going to say that's where everyone says you're done, and you have to look in and say, okay, what do I have to lose? And then you go all in the other way. And I'm going to say that period, that 12 months of my life, was my favorite business ever, of turning our company around and getting 2 weeks at a time from our lender and proving that we're turning it around. And then the matter of rapid testing. It also goes back to the team. The members of the team that weren't all in heart quit and left. Those that were left were unbelievable, and it opened up some spots. So I hired 2 superstars in the team, and the energy that the team had on a week by week basis and the fun they had was incredible. And that's the same thing of high expectation, low pressure on the team, and just giving them the wind behind the back to support, and let's have fun learning and testing. And I said, this is the best, most incredible learning opportunity you're going to have in your life. So let's learn and let's iterate and let's test all programs, channels, offers, because we're in high volume direct response. It doesn't take much for us to find some winners. That changes everything.
Had to replace that vendor, that the manufacturer?
It's a great question. So we actually had to go through a bankruptcy process. We went through it with one of our manufacturers. Well, first we try to get it to ourselves, then our manufacturer, actually for another manufacturer for other products that we had. Actually, went after it also to get out of bankruptcy. In the end, we partnered together. Said, okay, we'll let you win this, take it out of bankruptcy. We'll give you our business, give us special pricing on it. So so we able to get up and running, but the problem why it took us over a year to get back to a strong level of profitability was we had to rebuild those pool of auto ships that we have subscription customers that we lost. We just had to rebuild it, because in our business, that's where the money comes from, is from your auto ship customers, especially the long tail ones.
How did you end up coming up with the product idea of hair loss kind of regrowth product just for women.
It's funny because a lot of times it comes back to personal stories. So I was looking again. We were testing again. We were focused on skincare at the time, and we were looking for beauty products and testing everything. Um, quick story. So we did everything from skin anti-aging skin cream to or wrinkle cream to dark circles, which was one of our big winners. Then someone came up from our R&D team said there's a big issue that women have with their enlarged pores, and women are very insensitive. And then there was technology we can employ to actually shrink women's pores so it doesn't sit there looking that open for them. And then we tested a campaign on radio for what we called our product was a pore minimizer. Now, when you hear the word pore, what do you hear?
Yeah.
Exactly. It bombed. It bombed. Names do count from that perspective. But actually, my sister had basically was suffering from hair loss because of the basically death by
Mhm.
chemicals in her hair, just from just over treatment. And my mother, who is doesn't like to wear makeup, she doesn't need it. She barely had a wrinkle on her face, and she has just incredible skin and genetics. And she said to me, she said, "Tom, is there something you can do about this?" And my mom's not vain, but she was losing her hair, and so it just started triggering as far as just the questions. Then is why aren't there solutions out there? And I started looking. There aren't solutions for women, and why not? And then I went, and then I found out how widespread this issue is, and I went, wow, it's big out there. And then turned our PhD onto it and said, okay, what can we do? How can we create a clinically proven solution for this? And that's where she went to work on it. But it was the inspiration from my mother and my sister that said, there's
Yeah.
something here.
It's such a divine setup, isn't it?
100%, a hundred
Yeah.
percent.
Speaking of divine setups, I feel there must be a similar one with the Boise Cascade division that you managed to find for 15 million. How did that come about?
Oh, that happened at that period of time. It's like, and the same thing when we're out of money, just creating, with the acquisition of Urban Nutrition.
Mm.
Now, here's one um, where, again, it's the questions of are you asking the questions? So, and for example, in that situation, is we met these two young entrepreneurs and we helped them from consulting perspective. They had this great supplement business that was growing so great. Who knew they were open to a sale? And I credit my partner with asking them, "Would you sell?" And they said, "For the right
Mhm.
price, yes." And so what I do a lot in conversations with people is I always like to talk about people what their dreams and long term goals are to understand that. And a lot of times they talk about their current businesses and their desire to sell one day or desire to and really open it up and find out really what their goals are. And that creates the context for conversations of businesses that you would never imagine that you could ever buy, where you understand the motivation and creates opportunities. Um, and we always like to talk about our dreams and visions. So I think a lot of people think these are areas that are taboo, but we're entrepreneurs. We like to talk
Yeah.
about these things.
Yeah. Kind of related story here. I heard this from Robert G. Allen, who I interviewed previously. He's written a bunch of really big best-selling books. Yeah, millions and millions of copies sold, like 1 Minute Millionaire, Flash, Cash in a Flash, multiple streams of income, etc. And he explained this thing called a don't wanter, and he's looking for the don't wanter, which is I don't want this thing. It's a white elephant. It's just not. It's an albatross around my neck. I don't want it anymore. And one of the ways that he would do this is he would contact the the landlords that are advertising units and just keep advertising week after week. Clearly, they weren't filling their apartment buildings. So he would contact the landlord and he'd say, "Hey, I'm calling about the ad of this unit in such and such building." And the landlord's like, "Oh, yes, you're interested?" And he's like, "Not in renting. I'm actually interested in buying the whole building from you. You know, if you're open to it, if you want to not have this problem anymore of trying to fill the units in your property." And that's just a really cool idea to look for those opportunities in non-traditional ways.
Um, and the question is some people sometimes going down beaten paths that have already been proven are great, but sometimes being the audacious rebel or just doing things unconventionally and having the audacity to do that, I'm going to say is, and sometimes I've seen people do it risky and irresponsibly. Let me name a few people who did it that way. Is Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg. You look at the founders of Airbnb. You look at the founders of Lyft and especially Uber. Is they they basically had the audacity to break all the rules in order to create. They had a vision for the future which the world did not see.
Yeah. Oh, Elon Musk too.
And Elon Musk in a very big way, and therefore breaks a lot of rules, pisses people off. But you know something, you cannot create new realities of the future from conventional approaches that are there, and people are going to hate what you're doing, and after they're condemn you for it's like how many cease and desist and legal issues and rules and even laws were broken by Uber with what they were doing, but it was the only way they could to create this ride sharing revolution that they created in the end of changing the paradigm and breaking the rules of the taxis, which really had a monopoly on the different cities. It
Yeah.
was incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that there are patterns that you can create to creating um, non-conventional ways of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever you can do in your life to create and tease and look for those opportunities, it's just a muscle. I remember we were moving to Austin, Texas 4 years ago, and it was in the peak of 6 months into COVID. And it was so hot down there. The one criteria moving there towards the end of summer is I want a house with a pool, but you couldn't really find all the houses where pool were rented because it was COVID at that time. So my daughter said, "I got this." She went on. She went on and she found houses that were look for houses that were for on the market for over 6 months with pools that were basically that hadn't sold. And then she basically reached out to had our agent reach out to one of them that we really liked and made an offer to the owner that said, "Listen, it's off market now. It's already September. You're getting into October. The market's going to radically change by the time you get to next spring. How about this? We'll rent the house from you, and then in April you can start showing it, and we'll be out of the house by June of next year." And he was able to get about 25% more for his house by doing that. And for us, it was a great solution again, but no one else was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else was just looking at Zillow and the traditional places to rent houses and taking what they can get.
The George Bernard Shaw quote: "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man."
A reasonable man, 100% from that perspective.
Yeah.
So what the other tool that I picked up, there were two things I picked up in COVID, which were kind of interesting and helpful. One is it started with a buddy of mine. I called him up. I said, "Listen, I no longer have my 4 hour commute a day to Jersey City and back." I said, "Let's do something fun like buy a e-commerce Amazon brand." And Brian said, "I'm into it."
Mhm.
But then when something I picked up along the way was one is let me add a zero to that idea. What if instead of buying one, we bought 10 brands? I called him up and said, "Hey, let's buy a series of brands." He said, "I'm in." But then I said, "What would happen if I bought," and let's me add another zero to that idea. What happens if we bought 100 brands over time? It would be, and I said, well, the result would be if we're successful, it's a new model for how to build a CPG company. If we can pull it together and scale, I said, but everything that I know I've learned is you're going to blow up. It will not work. But then I sat down and I said, okay. And then I was reading a Harvard Business Review article because it was COVID and I didn't want to watch Tiger King. And it was about one question, one of the most powerful questions you can ask, which is, what would have to be true to make this possible? It takes people that have been through so much and has always reasons why and operational reasons things can't be successful. But asking this reverse question is, what would have to be true to make this possible? So you think the other way. So then I started writing everything to be true. And what they were is a list of operating assumptions. And then I said, can I make that true? Can I make that true? Can I make that true? And yes, 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 yes. And then that was it. So I chatted with Brian. I said, what do you think? He said, let's go for it. Going back to something I talked about earlier, is it's a big vision. Coming up with a roadmap for $1 billion company, a new way to build CPG company through programmatic mergers and acquisitions. And with that, we had able to recruit some top people from Amazon along. We had 7 meetings with private equity. We got 6 term sheets, and that's where we raised $100 million to launch Foundry Brands. If you asked me originally, what's my ability to raise $100 million to launch this idea, I'd say I'd say if someone came to me with that idea, I'd say you're doing something laughable, will never happen. But again, it by asking the right questions and challenge yourself. The first one is, what would happen if I had a zero to that idea? What would happen if I had another zero to that idea? And then the other question is, what would have to be true to make that possible? Made that vision and made that roadmap possible to create Foundry Brands.
Yeah. Amazing. That reminds me of the Byron Katie's 5 questions. Do you know about this?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's really cool. She's an incredible personal development guru, author. So the 5 questions are: is this true? Can I know with absolute certainty this is true? And how does this thought make me feel? What would life be like if this thought didn't exist? And then the last one was actually turning it around and taking that thought or that idea and coming up with the opposite. And she applied these questions to to limiting beliefs that people have. But you could apply it to anything. Like if you have an assumption around I can't achieve this because it's not the way things are done in the world. If you took the opposite and look for the evidence that the opposite is actually more true, and run those questions on the opposite, that's a very powerful way to live your life.
That's that's really powerful. But of course, you talk about limited beliefs. The biggest battles that any company has that are existential threats to every company's existence and future take place between here, the 2 ears of either the owner or the founders. That the founders are partners at the top of it, of every company, and that's the biggest battle. Because I'm going to say that what stopped me so many times from going to the next level was just limited beliefs of what I believe was possible, and something a tool that a friend of mine gave me, Mandy Keene, who is works a lot on limited beliefs with people. Mandy Keene, at the time when I was dealing with this challenge where Atlantic Coast Brands, we had our manufacturer going under, we were facing the end. I said, the level of anxiety is almost crippling. And she said, Tom, fast forward 2 years from now, what would the Tom Shipley of 2 years from now be telling you now about this situation? And so, and what advice would you be giving yourself? But that helped me from whenever I get really stressed and have anxiety, that philosophy of going back, what would myself 2 years from now? But then I've also actually asked that question is who am I going to be in 2 or 5 years, and what am I going to be capable of doing, and what is the scope and magnitude of doing that, and how can I, as in Atomic Habits, how can I take the person that I will become in 5 years, and how can I make that person become that person now? What habits, philosophy, attitudes can I have now to make that possible?
Yeah.
And so one thing I just want to talk about before we get it, and it's what I'm really excited and passionate about, and why I every 6 months spend $250,000 to get 100 entrepreneurs in a room for 3 days to teach the art of responsible acquisitions. I believe, as I said prior in the podcast, that you can solve almost every business through acquisitions. Anyone who's listening right now that has a business, if you buy one business around, remember that if you buy one business a year, buying a business is an SOP. You understand the approach to it. You understand the SOP. It's just a process you do. If you buy one business a year, that's a 30-year size. For the next 5 years, you will 10x your enterprise value. You will 10x versus right now you're growing at 10, 15% a year, and there's some risks, there's some bad years. You think that's programmatic, you think that's approach to grow organically, but there's significant risk. if you understand how to do it. So whether you want to 10x your exit, whether it is you're having operational issues that you don't have a great operational team in place. Um, a buddy of mine who spoke at our DealCon at the event summit, who's the one who I started Foundry Brands with. Um, Brian actually started. Brian actually he was brilliant at marketing and sales and development, and had a good agency, but they weren't great. But they charged 3 times the market rate. And what he did is he found an agency that was small. They were struggling to make payroll with some of the best operators in the business. And he basically, for a little bit of equity and basically increasing everyone's salary and reducing their stress and risk, he was able to acquire that business with their 1,500 page of SOPs. And then suddenly they were able to give the best delivery in the business from an Amazon agency perspective. You match great marketing, great delivery in place, and that's why he had a $200 million offer last year for his business. But again, it's what acquisition can solve your operational issues. If you have a business and you want to expand into TikTok, you can learn it yourself. You can hire outside agencies, or you can buy a TikTok agency that has profitable. They know how to do it. So again, you can solve most every business challenge you have. The hubris that we had at Atlantic Coast Brands, and our mistake was that we grew, even though our great successes were done because we did some acquisitions, but for almost every new brand, we developed them from scratch versus buying a brand that was doing $2 or $3 million of revenue, that had momentum, that had some level of success, because we could scale brands from 3 to 30 or 3 to 50 or 3 to 100. But getting brands off the ground, there's such huge risk. It would have been easier for us to leverage our balance sheet for buying these businesses that were maybe break even, and just buying their business, create deals, and actually create a destiny for those brands. So that's what I want people to hopefully understand, is that there's some real power for that. And it's every CEO's responsibility, every CEO and founder and entrepreneur's responsibility to look for leverage to get to create an unfair advantage. And what I'm sharing is that M&A is an unfair advantage that most CEOs are not taking advantage of, but it's accessible to everyone.
I think it's a paradigm shift for business owners to think in terms of, they've probably heard of the term M&A, mergers and acquisitions, but they haven't necessarily heard of the term roll-ups or programmatic M&A. And so they're thinking in terms of, well, I could merge with another company, but that's a big unknown. I don't know if that company is operating with the same kind of values and mindset that I have. And if they're not, then this whole thing could fall apart, and whatever I've built over these last 10 or 20 years could be lost, so they see it as a big risk. Versus if you think of it as a roll-up opportunity, well, what if I buy 5 different agencies or 5 different widget manufacturers and I add mine to it, and then we achieve economies of scale, and we remove redundancies, and we build something that is a big acquisition target because it's a big player now. That's a whole different kind of ballgame.
100%. And if you know what you're doing, you have the right advisors around, you can create deal structures that are low risk for your business, such as the deal terms are low risk. You're not bidding from a financial perspective your current business on the acquisition you're doing. Potentially ways that deals can be unwrung if it's not going the way you can spin it up. Also, I like the rule of a third. Is the minute you buy business that's over a third, you're talking about a cultural shift for your existing business. If it's a third, it's small enough that it can be absorbed. And you can also, my rule for when I do acquisitions is do no harm. If it makes sense to run them in parallel for a period of time, I do. And Stephan, you actually nailed the most important criteria for doing acquisition, and that is cultural alignment. There has to be the same people philosophy. Again, you cannot take an environment like, it's challenging when you take a people centric, nice environment and you merge it together with an Amazon like environment. Again, there's nothing wrong with either environment, though you're going to have cultural shifting clashes and you're going to lose people. And people are the driving engine and a key reason for a lot of times what you're acquiring, especially in service businesses.
Amazing. All right. I know we're out of time. So where should we send our listener or viewer, if they want to learn more about DealCon, if they want to learn from you, if they want to perhaps, I don't know, if you have a blog or a book or something that they can learn from, if they don't attend DealCon, what's their next step?
Okay, I'll share this to start with is, first of all, I'll make it easy as my email is tom@tshipley.com. That people can reach out to me. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, where I do a decent amount of posting and sharing in those areas. DealCon, the next event is coming up in uh, February 24th to 26th in Nashville, and you go to dealcon.com for more information on and a link to our next event, which is coming up. And it'll it'll be a paradigm shift event. There are people there that have done multiple acquisition. There are some people there that have never done an acquisition, and it's a room of. And my only criteria is I want good people that give energy and that are on emotion on fire and want to have impact. Other than that, and they're entrepreneurs, and that's what I want to fill the room with. Typically, it's businesses doing over $1 million in revenue and up to 200 million in revenue. So you'll see a mix of different businesses that are there. So that's the primary place. And of course, if you reach out to me, we have a M&A course. I can more than happy share you information on also.
Okay. And you have a promo code for DealCon as well. It's save 10 for 10% off.
Yes, save 10% on DealCon, 100%. And then hopefully you'll put that actually information with the link in the show notes. So
Yep, I'll for sure do that. My team will. Awesome. Well, Tom, this was awesome and really inspiring, incredible story. Thank you for sharing with vulnerability and candor this incredible journey that you're on. And congrats on everything.
well, I appreciate it. And from my perspective, it's like you, Stephan, is our journey in certain ways, our journey is just beginning.
For sure. All right. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, listener. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.